Welcome back to Today in Web3. This morning, we already went through the basics of the CFTC Binance lawsuit, but I had more questions. I want to talk to somebody. I want to know what happens if these digital assets become a commodity and not a security, or vice versa. What happens to the future of Binance, Binance.us? Does this lawsuit even matter when it comes to the global consequences to Binance.com? Is this all political? Choke point 2.0. And who's in the wrong? Changpeng Zhao and Binance? The CFTC, or both? That's why I welcomed on Leo Mizuhara, the CEO of Hashnote. Enjoy our conversation, and a quick note, I messed up. An amateur mistake. I didn't switch my earbuds to my microphone, so I apologize in advance for the audio quality. Enjoy. Leo Mizuhara, CEO of Hashnote, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Matt. Great to be on.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on so short notice. So the reason why we have you on today is because, the CFTC is going to sue Binance, CZ Zhao. There's a lot of things in play. We know about a lot of the details that was in the CFTC's release for the lawsuit. However, we don't have much conversation yet going on about maybe the downstream effects of this. And so I want you to tell us, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think that Binance is going to be in trouble? Do you think that it's actually going to have any effect to the global cryptocurrency environment? Do you think that Binance US and us, US citizens, are going to have some kind of effect?
Yeah, I think there are a variety of effects here. So I think we need to think about both the effects within the US and outside the US. It's worth noting that despite being a US lawsuit, this is a lawsuit against Binance Holdings, CZ, Samuel Lim, and a bunch of their entities. So we do need to look at both implications. I think there are soft implications for the industry at large that we can go talk about, but there are also some very hard implications about for Binance and CZ that we should talk about as well.
Okay, so what I'm looking at is because look, the global aspect of we already saw what Binance did when Binance.com got shut down in the United States. They just moved out and they're doing fine. They set up Binance.us. People have been using Binance.us, and it's a certain way of they put some of their coins on there, some of their altcoins, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and so on and so forth. They all have been on Binance.us. But globally, Binance has been thriving. I don't see this CFTC lawsuit actually affecting Binance as a whole. Do you?
I actually do. I think when we look at Binance as a whole, there's a lot of activity still coming from the US. And so we've seen that even within this lawsuit, right? One of the phrases that was in there was a quote from one of their guys saying that there is a Chicago law firm, unnamed Chicago law firm, that's like 12% of their flow. And that's just one firm. So I think there's a lot of US flow on there. I think the US is a big part of their profitability. And I think this is a huge shot across the bow for all of these. There's a lot of this kind of like wink, wink, nudge, nudge, just go outside the US and VPN in, right? And the CFTC is really saying, hey guys, stop that. You can't target US customers and even explicitly help them come onto your platform and act like you're not in US jurisdiction because, hey guys, you are.
So why is Binance even doing this? I mean, why don't they just set up Binance.us to cater to the Chicago firm that you were talking about and move all that traffic through them? Why do you even want to go through the .com? I mean, is it just because they have different altcoins or cryptocurrencies, digital assets listed there, so therefore they want to, get exposure to those, or is it just something else?
I think that's a great question, and that's going to be one of the questions around how this evolves forward, right? Can they set up a U.S. entity? They would have to register, and I think one of the things that we're seeing here is it's really the same line of attack that the CFTC had with BitMEX back in the day. They're saying that, hey guys, you're acting as a DCM, in TradFi, right? We have these different things that you have to register for. DCM is give me a second, I will think of it. DCM is designated contract market. A DCO is a derivatives clearing organization, and an FCM is a futures clearing merchant. And they're acting as all three of these. And that's something that you have to register with the authorities to do, and they have different laws around them. And Binance and previously BitMEX were completely avoiding this altogether, right? They're just acting as if, hey, we're outside of US jurisdiction, it doesn't matter anymore. And one of the interesting features about this, I think, is that the FCM one in particular, that sets up a precedent for criminal charges down the line. So if Binance actually gets indicted and is found guilty of being an FCM, you then set up criminal charges because as an FCM, you actually have to abide by the Bank Secrecy Act, and that's a criminal charge. So if they are not doing sufficient KYC AML, it sets up a very bad criminal indictment for Binance, but potentially also for CZ and Samuel Lim. And I think that's one of the hard um, repercussions that might come of this that they need to watch out for.
So that goes back to just my original point then. It's like, look, it doesn't matter where CZ is. CZ hasn't been in the United States for a while. He hasn't stepped foot in China for a while. I mean, so what does it matter if the CFTC is actually suing him and Samuel because they haven't been here anyway, and Binance.com is going to operate just perfectly outside the United States? So what if they close down Binance US? I'm going to be upset because some of my coins are not going to be up there, and I'll sell them, and I'll move them into Bitcoin, or I'll just hold the cash, or I'll put them into Tesla stock or something else. What does it actually even matter?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So twofold. First, on the individual humans, right? Do Kwon was in Serbia, and the Korean authorities eventually picked him up. I think it's pretty hard to evade the authorities for too long, and maybe you can, but it's kind of shit lifestyle. So maybe it matters for them, maybe it doesn't. But we'll see how that plays out. I think the individual part is perhaps less important. I think talking about the implications of the market in the US is really interesting, right? We're going to have some reduced liquidity. As a US investor, if you VPN into Binance, you actually get better liquidity. Like Binance was the best liquidity, best central liquidity provider out there. And
Sure.
that's a hit to the market, especially if US institutions can't market make on there anymore. That's going to be a hit. We see the SEC coming after Coinbase. Like a lot of our exchanges are kind of reducing their liquidity, right? Um, I think on top of that, we should generally be thinking about what does derivative availability look like for US users right now. Without Binance, US users really have very few choices as to how to access the derivatives market, right? The CME is one way, right? That's why the CFTC is claiming Ethereum and Bitcoin as commodities. Like clearly they're now listed on the CME and their futures are traded actively there. Perhaps not great capital use and such, but there's an active trading venue. You can also trade OTC, but to trade OTC, you need to be an ECP as an entity, right? You need to have more than I think it's 10 million in assets to be able to do that. So that's pretty limiting as well. So we are now seeing a significant limitation on derivatives exposure for U.S. traders. That's actually one of the reasons why we started Hashnote in the same space, because Hashnote is actually another way, and very importantly, another regulated way to access derivatives as a U.S. customer. And so, and not just for trading, right? We are offering this product primarily for derivatives markets end users and asset managers in this very regulatory compliant way. We're actually registered with the CFTC as a CPO, and so as these choices really narrow down, as we shut down these overseas choices, our ability to access these products really has to come through a regulated venue, and I think that's fairly important. Like if you're trying to get access to these products, you don't really want to be on a venue where they're unregulated, they don't have transparency over where their funds are, or or where they're giving kind of special treatment to specific market makers. Like that's another kind of open rumor around Binance. In order to increase the profitability of those market makers, right? You really want your orders to be treated fairly. So I think that's another implication here of our availability within the US of these derivative markets and the fairness of these markets as well.
Speaking of that, and we're talking about commodities and securities. I kind of it feels to me, and because you just brought up Hashnote, you brought up regulated commodities trading and derivatives and so on and so forth. Uh, but it seems to me that there is a political battle going on between some of the regulators. It seems as though the SEC is trying to move in and call like all of these digital asset securities, and so then it falls under the SEC. It also seems as though the CFTC has made this move pretty abruptly in the wake of the Wells notice from to Coinbase to try to call everything, which they did in the lawsuit, called everything a commodity, while the SEC has only called Bitcoin a commodity. Everything else they're trying to allude it to is a security. do you see or do you feel that this is a political battle to see who's going to have who's going to be the regulatory body to control these digital assets? And why would they want to control them? Is that because that they'll get more government funding or more support from whoever, Congress or the power of the purse, to put more money into their regulatory body? And what are the downstream effects of if these things are securities or if these things are commodities, these digital assets are securities or commodities?
Cool. So let's break this up again as well into two parts, right? The first thing let's talk about is the political battle and if that exists, and then we'll come back to the part about the commodities thing. So I actually kind of think that this political battle, it's something the media likes to talk about a lot. I think they play it up because there's like people love this like battle between personalities kind of narrative, right? I don't think there's that much of a political battle necessarily. So if you don't mind, I'll sandwich this with a no, yes, no kind of response. So
So
I
basically,
think
no
it's
answer.
overplayed.
Gotcha. Understood.
Well, there's definitely this like, there's it's I think it's definitely overplayed. And it's a hard place to regulate because we've seen that some of these tokens can go from commodity to security and back to commodity, and it's like, what am I supposed to do with something that dynamic? However, to your point, um, the commodities, I'm going to call them commodities, the commodities that were mentioned in the CFTC,
Smart. Yeah, I gotcha.
yeah, they said it, so I can say it too. Uh, they've named Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, BUSD, and USDT, right? BUSD was kind of already grabbed by the SEC, right? The Wells notice from the SEC to Paxos is basically their way of saying, hey, BUSD is a security. And the CFTC is now saying, no, BUSD is actually a commodity. We regulate the space. And so, if anything, I think that serves your point. I think that shows that there is a little bit of a turf war about to go on here, and we're setting that up right now. Like this is the one thing where they're gonna come to head is stablecoins. And then I'm gonna go back to the no part of my argument. I'm more concerned that this is a little bit of a coordinated attack, right? You mentioned the SEC against Coinbase. We have the CFTC now, which I think they've been building up this case for years, so it's a little bit of a coincidence. But a lot of people are talking about Operation Choke Point 2. We just had them shutting down Silvergate and Signature, right? Signature looks like kind of like an eminent domain kind of play. Like even Barney Frank is looking at that and being like, "Hey, why'd you take my equity?" Um, and then we've got these SEC lawsuits coming up and the CFTC lawsuits. I'm I'm more worried about choke point two than I am about a political battle between the CFTC and SEC.
No, no, okay. So I know you had like a yes or no answer, and I respect that. But maybe the only thing I got out of that is kind of like, doesn't it prove that digital assets are actually more complicated? Maybe it's just not. Maybe it's just that the CFTC is saying, hey, it's a commodity, and the SEC is saying, hey, it's a security, and the actual matter or actual fact is kind of like you alluded to is they are both. Sometimes they are a security. Sometimes they are a commodity. Sometimes they are a money or a form of payment, which should be taxed and thought of as differently than both of them. Isn't it just showing that the complexity of this whole new Web3 digital asset space, what people are trying to build, and maybe the future of the internet?
I think that's exactly right. Right? If we look at the rest of the world, they don't really they don't really distinguish between commodities and non or commodities and securities, right? They're all regulated by one regulator. We see Europe having come out with MiCA now, and that is, as much as people complain about it, or mostly complaints I see at least it's a single formed piece of regulation, and a lot of people are going to start following it. In the US, we somehow ended up into this like I think it's a path dependency problem, right? I think there was like a path dependency where we formed the CFTC, then we formed the SEC, and then we have this conflict now. But the rest of the world doesn't have that, and it's I think it's just an unfortunate path dependency that ended up here with this confusion around two different regulators, and it doesn't have to be that way, right? Like these things, like you say, can be regulated in a variety of ways, and they will have to be because some of these things, one of the products that we look at a lot are what's currently called real world assets. You're familiar with the whole RWA space, yep. Um, those are clearly securities, right? They're called asset-backed securities in TradFi.
Right, Right.
So those will be securities. I think some of these other things like Bitcoin, I think even the SEC says a commodity. Like there's so much richness there, and that's why it's so valuable, right? The fact that these are like programmable finance Legos makes them incredibly powerful and valuable, but maybe we shouldn't be throwing them in the same box as everything else.
One thing I did ask, but you didn't answer, and I really want to know this. I think a lot of people want to know this: is what does the future look like if it is a security, or these assets are securities, and what does it look like if they are commodities? I mean, you said that let's call them commodities because they did, and obviously that helps you because of the business that you're building. Um, but what does it look like if it's a security?
Yeah, I think it's going to be very hard to say everything is a security or everything is a commodity. I think there's a fair argument for a lot of these things to be securities, and that's fine. Um, there's there is nothing wrong with clear regulation around things that are clearly securities, like asset-backed securities are securities, and it just means that it kind of looks a lot like TradFi, right? You have to register all these things that you're doing. It doesn't mean that you don't get the benefits of kind of decentralized ownership. You get the benefits of transparency, the speed, the efficiency of a blockchain network. A lot of benefits do accrue there, but yeah, in certain jurisdictions, you're going to have to register those things. I think everything as a commodity is equally difficult, right? Asset-backed securities are going to be securities. Bitcoin is going to be a commodity. There's going to be a lot of gray area in between. And I think the ones we have to worry about are the ones that flip back and forth. And how are we possibly going to wrap our heads around that? And do we do we push a lot of this overseas because of the U.S.'s inability to wrap their heads around it? Um,
Hmm.
I do have a fair bit of optimism around. America has this way of waiting till the last possible second and suddenly changing course and doing the right thing. And I have a little bit of
Yeah.
optimism around that, I'm hoping. But at the same time, we're in a weird political environment and there's a lot going on. So maybe they won't. I'm quite concerned to kind of take this on a slightly different path. Quite concerned about the reserve currency status of the U.S. dollar, and if this uh, if this inability to capture the value of cryptocurrency is going to challenge their reserve currency status. I think they're already being challenged in a variety of ways. And the bank runs that happened a couple weeks ago have clearly shown that some people are willing to run to Bitcoin when you have the strength of the dollar being challenged. And that's a really interesting path to explore and see what happens in the near future.
So you alluded to something there, and I'm gonna just tie it into what you just said as well. You said choke point 2.0, and
Yeah.
we've been seeing a lot of, let's just call them coincidences. We see that there's bipartisan. There's never bipartisan anything in the past decade here in the United States, but bipartisan support for crypto regulations. There's bipartisan support for this new Restrict Act. There's bipartisan support to kick TikTok out of the country. There's bipartisan support now that is going to clamp down on cryptocurrencies and make some sort of regulations. There's companies coming out that are going to say, "Hey, we never liked crypto," kind of like Nvidia today. They were just like, "Oh," the CTO was just like, "You know what? It was always crap. We made money off it, but it was always crap." We see that where banks seemingly, or at least some Congress people alluded to it, that were targeted purposely because of their them hosting um, monies or crypto assets, Signature Bank being it, or SVB being part of the whole startup, the whole startup industry and cycle, and a lot of crypto companies being in there as well. Uh, you said choke point 2.0, and then you said Fed reserve currency. We see inflation, we see bank runs, and so on and so forth. Do you think that this is an effort by the Biden administration, or just maybe the put on our tinfoil hat, some kind of shadowy, back secret government that's controlled by the Fed, or do you see that there's something more at play here? Because there's a lot of coincidences, and I don't believe too much in coincidence.
Yeah, I try to avoid this debate because I'm very much anti tin
This
hat,
is this is
but
not a
there's
debate.
a
This is just
lot
a
of
question.
there are a lot of coincidences, yes. And I think Signature Bank was a big one for me. I was pretty surprised at the outcome of Signature Bank, and I'm
Were
also
you
quite
using Signature
surprised.
Bank?
We were, yes.
Oh, okay. So
And
this came to as a surprise for you. Everything
yeah,
was fine until it wasn't.
and it was still fine, honestly. Like the bank still functions and they still do everything they're supposed to do, but now they're owned by a different company, right?
Right.
Um, but the thing that's interesting to me about what seems like a coordinated attack here is that I think they've misplayed their hand, right? As soon as this all happened, cryptocurrencies jumped 25, 30%. And it's because they don't seem to understand. Like the whole point of Bitcoin was to be a censorship resistant currency. And they've literally shown that the US wants to censor that currency. And we've established that your ability to spend your money, use the banking system is a form of free speech, right? And when they try to censor that, uh, Bitcoin jumps because the
Hmm.
censorship resistant currency is the thing that people flock to when governments start to overplay their hand. And I think that's a really fascinating turn of events. And I think it really requires the regulators or the government, and government's hard to say, right? Government is a giant coordination problem with lots of players at hand, but it really requires a thinking strategically about, what are they really trying to do? Because proving the use case of Bitcoin by attacking cryptocurrency that was not their goal.
Right. Right. I guess last question I was really curious about because when Coinbase got served their Wells notice, the crypto community pretty much in mass came out and said, we support Coinbase, right? And which we
Yep,
do. Um,
very much do. Brian Armstrong's doing a great job.
yes, we very, very much do. And we saw with their communications with the SEC Gary Gensler, or their attempted communications with the SEC Gary Gensler, that they were trying to be very transparent. They were trying to basically get the rules of the game. They're trying to create products that fit within a regulatory structure, or even create said regulatory structure with the SEC, the CFTC, Congress, or whoever. It seems as though they're very willing to work with it. And then still, the Wells notice came, and they're kind of like, wait, what did we do wrong, right?
Right.
With the CFTC, however, it seems as though that there are a little bit of, let's just call it what it is, a little bit of Binance fuckery in the background, right? That was trying to purposely evade the regulations of certain countries, or namely here in the United States, and thinking that there will be no repercussions. Maybe creating shell or fake departments in Binance to make it show like we're being compliant, but they really weren't, and everything actually went through CZ. Um, do you agree that there is fuckery going on with Binance that we should probably be concerned about as an industry that says, hey, what we're trying to build here is something more like you said, the choke point 2.0 is actually proving the use case of Bitcoin, right? Even though there's this
And Ethereum, right? They're all censorship
and
resistant
Ethereum.
because of the yeah.
Exactly. So it's proving that these things work like planned. Um, but the things that's bringing down this industry are people in the back end that are not operating correctly. Sam Bankman-Fried's, and now we see that it could be. And am I right or wrong with this? CZ.
Mhm. I think that's exactly right. We have so many bad actors in the cryptocurrency sphere right now. And on one hand, I think some of that happens because you've pushed it out of the US. Um, I have this is a little bit of a spicy take, but let's go for it, right? I
Go for it.
I think the US, it's super regulated, and if you go abroad, the amount of fuckery, as you put it, we see abroad in general is incredible. Like
Hmm.
even in other first world countries, you travel out there, people are trying to take your money. There's all sorts of piracy. There are people who are committing frauds, and there is nowhere in the world where the rule of law within finance is as well regarded as it is in the US. And
Mm.
that's why the US financial system is the dominant financial system in the world. It's why we have the reserve currency. And it's something that I think America is kind of taking for granted right now. And it's one of the reasons why I think they are likely to, well, they're putting their reserve currency status at risk right now by overplaying their hand with this.
Hmm.
But overall, you do see a very orderly financial market here in the U.S. And yeah, it's just I think it illustrates like we illustrate how good a financial market it is when you don't expect things like CZ and SBF to occur in the US, and that these giant frauds are all happening outside the US. We push them outside where we could no longer look carefully at their books and regulate what they're doing. And guess what happens? Like these people show up and they become huge. We don't have that here, and I think that's something the U.S. can be proud of, but they need to defend that ability to keep the companies here, keep the GDP within the U.S. And regulate them fairly. I think the CFTC is doing the right thing here, right? Going after a a foreign player who is clearly skirting the rules and setting the rules up quite clearly, right? They aren't making anything new up here. They did this with BitMEX. They're very clear that if you have U.S. customers, you follow U.S. rules. And I just wish that all regulators would be equally clear. It is one of the reasons why we decided to register with the CFTC for Hashnote as well.
You kind of created a chicken and egg situation here, right? For the United States, it's one of the best regulated financial markets. Therefore, it is probably the safest. There's not as much in where we're going to use fuckery as even in developed nations around the world. Here, because of the regulations, because of the frameworks, because of the systems, the institutions. Yet at the same time, people like FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried, um, you know, Arthur Hayes, now CZ Zhao, you see that they needed to set up outside because of these systems. Do these systems actually have validity then? Do you think that these products that they're offering um, actually have validity if you can't set them up in a regulated market like the United States with ease? Or is it just the United States that has the issue because you can't do it with these? Or can you do it with these? Because I've never set these up. I have no clue how to set up an exchange or derivatives or anything. Is it easy to do? And they're just saying, you know what, screw you, United States government, and we're going to do it somewhere else, or what?
I think so cop out argument is there's a little bit of all of it, but
Okay.
certainly, if we gradate these things, it is easier to set up without regulation than with regulation, right? That's clear. And
Well,
it
obvious,
is,
yeah.
yeah, so that's
Yeah.
that like clearly you would go abroad for that reason, but there's a lot of money in the US, right? If you want to maximize the amount of money you can make, you have to tackle the US financial system. And that's what Binance did, right? They skirted the law and said, but we need to serve US customers because that's where the money is. And so, yeah, it is more difficult. It is even more difficult now because of this perceived hostility by the US regulators. Um, Personally, I think that hostility is coming more from the SEC than CFTC, right? I think the CFTC, like, nobody here is looking at this lawsuit and being like, oh, they're being unfair to Binance, right? We're
Hmm.
looking at this Binance and
Right.
we're being like, wow, what a bunch of fuckers.
Right.
Um, the SEC, I not to like, I mean, we saw the Voyager case, right? The judge's ruling from the Voyager case. That was quite startling, right? The judge was quite clear about his opinions on the matter.
Hmm.
And we all try to support Brian Armstrong, and we think that they're trying to do their best to stay within regulation too. Um, so yeah, I think there's a little bit of excess difficulty right now in setting some of these things up, and it might be pushing some of these companies away. But I like to be optimistic about the U.S. system. I think that good products will come about. Franklin Templeton has that Benji product. They've created a product there that's pretty good. I think in general, our incubator, Cumberland Labs, is trying to find ways where they can create regulated product as well. And I think that's the next step in the evolution of crypto. I think we are generally moving toward this next step where a lot of things are going to be regulated, and we're going to have to pick and choose where we're going to be regulated, how we're going to, like, and that's what banks do, right? Each bank needs to pick its regulatory environment, where it's going to set up shop, what customers it's going to cater to. And, it's part of the maturation of the cryptocurrency environment.
Okay, so if I'm going to break down this whole conversation and interpret it, we do see actual fuckery with Binance and CZ. I will say that you say that not, you said everybody is looking at Binance going like, oh, what a bunch of fuckers. I don't think that's the case. I think there's a lot of people just saying, liberty, freedom across the board. They should be able to do this, set up shop however they want and offer these digital assets. So there is that argument as well. Maybe more libertarian. However, we see the dangers in that, as well. So I mean, both arguments can be had. But
Yeah.
anyway, breaking it back down, that Binance is, lost my train of thought there for a second. 1 second. If I was going to sum up this whole conversation, is that okay? So this seems very much, and I hate to use this analogy because it's been used way too much. Uh, the internet of the '90s. We have a lot of companies that set up shop. A lot of companies that really were trying to play in an unregulated environment. I mean, even Amazon was doing the same thing when they weren't paying taxes or from state to state to state sales taxes until
Yep.
they figured out how to do that. The bigger companies that want to play ball, the bigger companies that are going to figure out the regulations, the bigger companies that have enough capital to work through said regulations are probably going to come out on top, and I mean, we'll see these behemoths in the crypto space, in those crypto finance or digital asset finance space. Maybe it'll be a $1 trillion market cap or $2 trillion market cap Coinbase, and not all these little companies that are trying to just duck and jive and hustle in the background, in the early stages of this industry. Is that what I hear in this whole? If I was to put everything in a nutshell.
I think that end state is not the end state that I expect. Um, I
Oh,
think
what's your
part
end
of the
state then?
I think the end state has a lot more players. I actually think that when I think of DeFi, right, I don't think of DeFi in terms of this completely decentralized, everyone self-custody is like super libertarian world. Um, I actually see a world of certainly that part of DeFi will still exist where it's full self-custody, anyone can get access. I think it's going to be relatively small. I think there's going to be a lot of this kind of CFI DeFi merging, where you have these like this subset of walled gardens where people can act in a slightly safer manner, somewhere where you're not afraid that you're going to get rugged as soon as you touch a website, which like honestly it's pretty scary
Right.
out there right now. And the regulations will be more clear, so those companies will be easy to set up. And instead of the current state where we have these banks, we've got these like you know BlackRock has $10 trillion in assets, right?
That's
That's
insane.
crazy.
That's crazy.
Uh, we've got like the other big players, Fidelity, Vanguard, right? 3 trillion, 6 trillion. That's I don't think that's the world of the future. I think we're going to have a lot more smaller players. We're going to have smaller asset managers, smaller banks, smaller general financial service providers because it's so easy to provide good software with different features to the market. And I do think that you'll have to go through some sort of regulation to enter these various walled gardens, which is like trying to give your product to different customers in different countries, right? Kind of same sort of paradigm. But it's going to be so much easier to provide this service. It's going to be so much more secure because it's cryptographically secured through a blockchain. You're going to be able to do this so much more with your money and other assets for that matter. Like maybe you're like we're financializing all of our assets, right? And so I think there's going to be a lot of power in that and a lot more variety in how you can use your wealth. Um, and that is hugely accretive for humans, right? We're going to get lots of small companies providing you with lots of services. It's not going to be just like your choices are Bank of America, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, BlackRock, apparently. it's I think there will be some democratization there and it won't be, Coinbase and JP Morgan standing at the end of it. I hope not,
Well,
at least. Like that's
well, I hope not too, but I will bet on the former than the latter. I think it will be the Coinbases, the Circles, and there will be new emerging companies. I think that the $10 trillion cap for BlackRock is going to be small in the future. I think that when we have these new digital assets, obviously, that they're going to be packing different kinds of ways to bundle not only real world assets but also digital assets. You're going to create a global GDP that's going to dwarf what we have now, and these companies are now going to be global. We're going to have this decentralized global entity that's able to move money at the speed of of need, and you're going to see. I think multi-trillion-dollar companies is going to be the small company, and they'll be under the BlackRock with the 30, 40, 50, 60 trillion dollars, and it's going to be an absolute behemoth. That's the future, I think, because you could purchase companies, you could purchase assets, you can be the on and off ramp for many different providers. Even if there's small different players in there, they all have to go through some kind of intermediary. They all comply to regulations that may be under a global umbrella of this decentralized DeFi, decentralized asset class, controlled by BlackRock. But I just can't see it being smaller players. I think it's gonna be small players is going to be the $1, $2, $3 trillion companies.
Maybe that's right. So I guess my question to you would be, do you think there would be more companies doing this or less? Right? Are there going to be more financial companies or fewer financial companies, even if they're big?
That's a good question. I think that we're going to see an explosion in what is we're going to see an explosion in global GDP because we're going to start actually looking at the digital space. And then once we get like the whole meta, virtual, collectible kind of things down into how that actually works out into, real money,
Yep.
in air quotes, real money. I think then we're going to see an explosion. I think we're going to actually altogether see less, but more companies being to build on those on and off ramps. For example, if we're going to see gaming, Web3, artists and so on and so forth, I think there would be some sort of hub or a connection that everybody kind of works through to get on and off into this digital space. Plus, that digital space has the bridge over into the physical space and the tangible real world assets as well. So there'd be less companies, but more people being accessed to those companies. That's the kind of way I see it.
I could see that world. I think that it's going to be like triple the number of companies. I think if we think of the current TradFi space as like one set of companies, I think maybe you create another set of companies that are fully virtual, and then you create a bridge set of companies. So you've got kind of like three big categories of companies, and potentially they're all as big as or bigger than the current set of TradFi financial companies, right? So we've created this like explosion of financial companies, both digital, non-digital, mixed, and they're all enormous. And I think that's a great outcome, right? That's the world we want, where there's tons of wealth around the world, and we're all living in this kind of AI future where we can live cushionly through our financial means. Like we'll see 100%. If that optimism works.
The only pushback I have to that one is that I don't see why they wouldn't purchase it, or that some kind of financial troubles would allow for them to get acquired by other companies, or just like we're seeing with X Bank acquiring SVB, a smaller bank, or Signature, and so on and so forth. And we're honestly consolidating. Even
we saw it in
Credit Suisse,
right?
Credit Suisse is a big bank. It's being bought up by a bigger bank. It's just I just don't see how little companies can. It's kind of like startups. Startups, they want to be acquired. They want to sell. They want to exit. Why? Because it's a good payday, and that in the Amazons or the Googles or the Apples of the world gets that tech, gets that innovation, gets a great founder, a great innovator, and puts them into their fold. I think that's just inevitable, that it just consolidates. And maybe your future is the near term future, and the future that I'm talking about is the 100, 200, 300 years down the road. But I guess we'll find out. Leo, thank you for going over our 15-minute conversation today. It was fun. I hope everybody finds value of this, and I can't wait to see you back on the show again.
Great to meet you, Matt. Great being on the show. Have a great day.
Hey, everyone. The bull run is coming. It's coming quick, and you need to be up to date on everything that's happening in the Web3 space. So please follow us on Twitter and subscribe, share these videos so we can keep you up to date daily on Web3 news.